Hello and thank you for joining us on the Capitol Report on NTD Television. I'm Steve Lance. Here's a look at some of the stories we've been covering for you today. Thousands of U.S. troops are moving into Eastern Europe. This as the Pentagon vows to defend NATO allies if war erupts, while others warn of dangers in a different arena. With U.S. troops building up in Eastern Europe, U.S. and Russian diplomats are hopeful for diplomacy. But is Russia building an even more dangerous alliance in the process? New York Congresswoman Claudia Tenney is here with us to discuss. House Democrats will likely pass the America Competes Act with hopes of easing inflation, boosting our competitive edge, and standing up to China. But the bill has lost some Republican support. We'll tell you why that is.
It's important that we send a strong signal to Mr. Putin and, frankly, to the world that NATO matters to the United States.
An additional 3,000 U.S. troops are moving into Eastern Europe in the next few days.
It's an attack on one is an attack on all. We are making it clear that we're going to be prepared to defend our NATO allies if it comes to that.
2,000 troops based at Fort Bragg in North Carolina will be deployed to Germany and Poland. An additional 1,000 already in Germany will reposition to Romania. The Pentagon says these are not permanent moves.
Moreover, these forces are not going to fight in Ukraine.
The Pentagon adds that Wednesday's move does not mean the U.S. believes Putin has decided to invade Ukraine. This as the White House walks back on describing a Russian invasion as imminent.
I used that once. I think others have used that once, and then we stopped using it because I think it sent a message that we weren't intending to send, which was that we knew that President Putin had made a decision.
Meanwhile, Senator Josh Hawley calls the latest troop deployment a mistake. He says it's putting more Americans in danger in Europe, while our signal threat is China. In a letter sent to Secretary of State Antony Blinken, Hawley demands clarity on how Ukraine's membership in NATO serves U.S. interests. He also urges Biden to rethink basic assumptions about U.S. foreign policy that have been collapsed by the rise of China. Senator Hawley is asking Blinken to respond to his questions by the end of February. That includes whether Blinken is concerned about the U.S. military's ability to defend Ukraine against a Russian invasion while simultaneously deterring Chinese aggression in the Indo-Pacific. Iris Tao, NTD News, Washington, D.C.
The U.S. has just ordered 3,000 troops to be sent to Eastern Europe. This comes as Putin says he's still open to dialogue to avoid a potential conflict. Here to discuss the implications of it all, we're happy to have New York Congresswoman Claudia Tenney. Congresswoman Claudia Tenney, thank you for joining us on the Capitol Report.
Thank you. Great to be on again.
Now, Congresswoman, President Putin yesterday broke his month-long silence. He signaled some openness, but blamed the U.S. for the crisis with Ukraine. Do you believe there's still options for diplomacy when it comes to the Ukraine-Russia conflict?
Well, I don't think we can ever give up on diplomacy. Obviously, Putin indicates that it's NATO who is the aggressor, while Putin is amassing troops all around Ukraine, surrounding it and signaling that they're going to be moving in. And also actually demanding that we block Ukraine from joining NATO. And so I think that, Putin is pretty much signaling and very transparently that, he's got an interest in Ukraine and their resources and the people there and, stakeholding even further into that section of Europe. So I do think diplomacy has got to be continued. I do not want to see U.S. troops, although I know there's been lethal aid sent by the Biden administration, or at least the talk of lethal aid. We did send resources back in the fall and September. But again, the Biden administration is projecting weakness as we continue to allow Putin and also to allow Xi Jinping of China to weaponize energy. We aren't going to see a lot of changes here. And a lot of the Europeans, including the Germans, are weak on this because they're dependent on Russia for oil. We're not exporting at the level we were when we were energy independent under President Trump.
Now, you just touched upon that with Xi Jinping. China's expressed support for Putin trying to block action on Ukraine in the UN Security Council. Putin and China's leader Xi are meeting this Friday ahead of the opening ceremonies for the Olympic Games. Some experts say we may be pushing Russia closer to China by getting so involved in this conflict. Should this be a cause for concern?
It is a cause for concern, but it's a tricky one because while we're weak, Putin and Xi Jinping are natural, even though they're somewhat hostile in a way. They're natural enemies against the U.S. and NATO. And so I don't think you can say, oh, if we're harsh on them, we're going to push them together. I think we need to be tough on both of them. And I think that we need to make a statement, especially with the Olympics coming, where the two of them are going to get a chance to really show the world who the leadership is in the world. And people are going to see on a national stage in a non-political way, China showcasing the Olympics and Putin being there alongside them. And then a weak President Biden, who's now being ambushed by the New York Times and his own side on the controversial stories with his son and potentially, connections between President Biden and his son and China compromises. So I think this is a really bad look for the United States to project such weakness and have such a weak leader while these two are going to be, getting the world stage. Unfortunately, it's going to be the first time in America, in world history, that we're going to have a country that is openly committing a genocide against some of its own people is going to be hosting the Olympic Games, and we're all going to pretend not to look as if that's not happening.
Now, I just want to ask you about a bill that you're co-sponsoring, the Countering Communist China Act. In a tweet, you compare the Republican bill with the Democrats' America Competes Act, which is also China-focused, although you might not know given the name of the bill. You said the Republican bill costs less, does more to protect America, and it holds China accountable. How do these two bills differ?
Well, first of all, the Democrats' bill doesn't have any reference or any sanctions, any kind of advantage to the United States against China. There's no mention of China in their bill, and it's really about just empowering China. Our bill is actually going to take real steps to improve the American economy, give American workers and American companies an edge over China. And right now, the Democrats' bill doesn't offer that. It's actually a giveaway to China, and it actually is a giveaway to initiatives that are going to be right in China's wheelhouse, whether it's green energy, batteries, the production of lithium, rare earth minerals. We're not doing anything to minimize China's leverage over us and other countries around the world.
Congresswoman Claudia Tenney, thank you.
Thank you so much.
And House Democrats will soon pass a bill they say will boost American manufacturing, called the American Competes Act. But some Republicans have dubbed it the America Concedes Act because they say the effort would only help the Chinese Communist Party. China Task Force Chairman Michael McCaul is one of many Republicans withdrawing his support for the bill. But why is it losing bipartisan support in the House? NTD's Melina Wisecup reports.
House leadership is bringing to the floor the America Competes Act, and we heard from a group of House Democrats earlier who all say they're eager to see this bill passed, and it is likely to pass through the Democrat-controlled House. But it's not looking as bipartisan anymore. What was once started as a bipartisan effort in the Senate, when the Senate passed their version of it over the summer, is now drawing Republican pushback, at least from House Republican members, because they say many of the tough on China provisions have been stripped from the bill. That's why many of those House Republicans say they'll be voting no.
It threw out all the good stuff that we put in there to help counter China from a technology competitiveness, from an ability to stop cash flows into China.
The House bill invests in efforts to address climate change, working with China to, quote, develop and deploy clean energy generation technologies. However, there have been complaints that the raw material used to make solar panels in China have been made with forced labor. And the bill does try to crack down on this by imposing sanctions for human rights abuses in Xinjiang. So you're not confident that those sanctions on the Xinjiang region will be enforced?
I think they're creating a collision course between funding that will go to the very province where they commit genocide. That's where they create the green energy. And they're going to get around those provisions, maybe moving it to other places, but still using Uyghur Muslim population for forced labor.
But Republicans support some parts of the bill, like the CHIPS Act and investments in American innovation and technology. This is where both parties are on the same page.
That's going to relieve some of the supply chain pressures that we have, directly confront inflation, and ensure that American manufacturing can be competitive, that we can restore it, and that we can continue to lead in technology and innovation.
And it's got to go to the president. It matters to the country, every single provision in it.
So, Melina, from what we've heard today, Democrats are aiming to keep all pieces of this bill in the final version. How likely is that?
Well, Steve, this House version of the bill that is expected to pass, we will see some changes in this bill because after it passes, the members from the Senate and the House will come together in a conference and make changes to the bill, reconcile the differences between the two bills. So the question is, after those changes are made, will those changes be solid enough for Republicans, solid enough in the Republicans' demands for them to vote yes on it in the Senate and get it to Biden's desk? So that's something we'll be looking at throughout the next week or so, and we'll keep you updated once we know if there's enough Republican support to get this to Biden's desk. Steve, back to you.
Lujan's office said in a statement that on January 27th, the U.S. Senator experienced dizziness and fatigue. He checked himself into a hospital and was later found to have had a stroke. The 49-year-old Democrat is resting comfortably at a hospital and is expected to make a full recovery. Lujan's absence leaves the Democrats at 49 votes until he recovers. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer told reporters he expects Lujan's quick return to the Senate. And House Majority Leader Steny Hoyer announced on Tuesday that he has tested positive for the CCP virus and will be voting by proxy. The Democrat congressman from Maryland said he experienced mild symptoms and tested positive for the virus. The congressman is 82 years old. Hoyer said he'll be working from home and voting by proxy during his quarantine. Congress proxy voting was approved in May 2020 and challenged by House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, who called it a patently unconstitutional practice. The Supreme Court on January 24th declined to take up the challenge. Today, President Biden unveiled a new plan to reduce cancer deaths by 50% over the next 25 years. This is part of the Cancer Moonshot initiative, which Biden has been devoted to for years.
We can end cancer as we know it. I committed to this fight when I was vice president. Now that I am president, this is a presidential White House priority.
President Biden has set a 25-year plan to reduce cancer-caused deaths by 50%. This issue is a deeply personal one for Biden, as his elder son Beau died of brain cancer in 2015. According to the American Cancer Society, nationwide there will be over 600,000 cancer deaths this year. Biden plans to form what he is calling a cancer cabinet to work on this issue. That includes 18 federal departments and agencies. He also called on Congress to provide funding for the initiative and to improve early detection of cancer with more screenings. The FBI issues a warning to U.S. Olympic athletes, urging them to leave their personal phones at home while in Beijing for the Olympic Games. The FBI says their phones are vulnerable to malicious cyber attacks. With the Winter Olympics set to begin this week in China, a United States congressman is shedding light on one of the Chinese regime's darkest secrets: state-sanctioned forced live organ harvesting on Falun Gong practitioners. The Washington football team just announced its new name today. The former Redskins will now have a new name and a new logo. We'll tell you that name in just a moment. Hello and welcome back to NTD's Capitol Report. The FBI is urging Olympic athletes to leave their personal phones at home while at the 2022 Winter Games in Beijing. The FBI issued a warning to U.S. Olympic athletes that their phones are vulnerable to malicious cyber activities. The notice sent by the Bureau urged athletes to use temporary phones while in Beijing. People attending the Olympics will be required by the CCP to download an app it claims to be for COVID monitoring purposes. The FBI looked into the app and issued a report saying that it did not protect personal data and that it allowed a third party to access data on the phone. The Chinese Communist Party is set to host its second Olympic Games while massive genocide against its own people is taking place. Congressman Scott Perry of Pennsylvania says that the time is now to hold the CCP accountable. Here's our interview with the congressman. Congressman Scott Perry, thank you so much for joining us on the Capitol Report.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Now, Congressman, we're on the eve right now of the Olympics starting in China. Even though we know that there's multiple genocides taking place all throughout China at the hands of the Communist Party, the Olympics are going on. Do you think this, in effect, normalizes the CCP and emboldens them?
I sure do. I think that's their intent. They want to showcase their country. They want people to accept them as a responsible partner in the world of nations. And keep in mind, you said a genocide. Not only a genocide with the Uyghur people. These are things that you've read about in history. You've seen the photographs, the horrific stories where the world said, never again. But it's almost even more sinister than that, because it's not just the wholesale concentration and potentially mass murder of people just simply for their beliefs, but things like forced sterilization and organ harvesting. Can you imagine? Like, there's no waiting list. People don't know this. There's no waiting list in China to receive an organ transplant. Now, you wonder, how can that be? Is it because they have such a huge population? Well, yeah, it's just a numbers situation, right? We have a big population too, but there's more than need than can give, because if you give your organs, that's going to be a problem for you. But see, there's an unlimited supply.
To put that into context, right. In the United States, it takes 2 years. Even, former Vice President Dick Cheney had to wait 2 years for his heart.
Right.
In China, it takes 2 weeks.
2 weeks, right? So where are they getting the organs? And particularly some folks like the practitioners of Falun Gong are imposed upon for these forced organ harvesting, and of course you lose, at the best case you lose your health, at the worst case you lose your life, right? And we've heard horrific stories of the practice in itself is unimaginably horrific and barbaric, but you hear stories that there's no sedation, right? It's done live organ harvesting, right? Those kind of things. It's just unimaginable. So this allegedly responsible nation being allowed to host the Olympics, it's just completely unacceptable. And of course, I had a bill. The athletes have trained all around the world, and they shouldn't be punished. But Beijing and the Communist Party of China, we're not talking about the billions of Chinese people that are yearning to breathe free. We're talking about the thugocracy of the Communist Party, the ruling party in China. It's essentially a criminal organization that's running a country. They should not be allowed to host the Olympics and showcase their country in the light of all these atrocities.
Now, Congressman, I want to ask you about your bill. It's called the Falun Gong Protection Act. It points out that, these organs, like you mentioned, it's unexplainable where they're coming from. Yet here in America, we're still training Chinese transplant doctors. Would your bill end these types of practices and make America unwittingly complicit in organ harvesting?
Yes, the bill would do that. We don't want to be involved in any way in this practice, and we want to make it very clear to the rest of the world, the American people and the Communist government of China, that this is unacceptable and it must stop immediately, and we're not going to be assisting in it. The tax dollars aren't going to it, and your practitioners can't come here and learn how to do it.
Now, Congressman, another related bill that was introduced by the Democrats is called the America Competes Act. It attempts to hold the regime accountable for Uyghurs, the persecution against Uyghurs, which is real, it's horrendous, sure. It's horrific. Do you think it's possible to get any accountability measures into this bill related to organ harvesting against Falun Gong?
Well, we tried. We tried to. We talked to the folks on the other side, on the Democrat side of the aisle. We made some corrections to appease them. And of course, all we said was that the president could sanction any Chinese company or official found to be engaging in organ harvesting and persecution of Falun Gong, right? So that's pretty easy, because you got to find it first, right? You can't just say, well, we think so. Well, so you got to find it. And my colleagues on the other side of the aisle rejected it, wouldn't even allow the amendment to be heard. So the amendment's not even allowed to be voted on. So that's problematic. Do we stand with humanity, and do we stand against forced organ harvesting? Even though we're Democrats and Republicans, conservatives, liberals, and independents, or what have you, who's for this? This should be an easy one where, again, in a divided nation where there's not a lot of things we agree on, certainly I can't imagine we don't agree on that.
Now, just real quick, we've heard cases of the CCP lobbying members of Congress directly or indirectly. Sometimes we hear of situations where they hire certain American lobbying firms to do their bidding. How concerning is that to you?
Well, it's very concerning to me. We are essentially, for the sake of the almighty dollar, for money, people would be willing to sell out their country, sell out their values to the Communist Party of China, who's not interested. We don't call China our enemy. We don't want China to be our enemy, but China has called us their enemy. So we need to acknowledge the circumstance and do something about it. And certainly helping your enemy is not helpful to your own cause. So this should be simple, but greed is a very powerful motivator. And unfortunately, there are people that succumb to it.
Congressman Scott Perry, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Senator Rick Scott today also weighed in on the CCP's human rights abuses. He said now with the Olympics opening ceremonies this Friday, it's the perfect time to shed light on the Communist Party's true nature.
We use this time every day we can to try to shed the light on exactly who the Chinese Communist Party is. This is our perfect opportunity to raise our voices in support of the Hong Kongers, freedom movers, and to stand in solidarity with those who are in jail because they use their voice to support democracy.
According to Bloomberg, over 1,500 Hong Kong civilian jobs have been lost under the national security law. More than 60 organizations were disbanded just over this past year alone. A memorial was held today in Baltimore in honor of 3 firefighters who died battling a blaze that started when a vacant row home partially collapsed last week. Maryland Governor Larry Hogan described the firefighters as heroes.
On behalf of all of the people of Maryland, as we pay tribute to the life and the legacy of 3 of our true heroes.
Federal authorities are still seeking a person of interest who was captured on video surveillance. The reward has grown to $100,000 for any information leading to the identity of that person. After 18 months of searching and evaluation, the Washington football team, once known as the Washington Redskins, has announced its new name.
Today's a big day for our team, our fans, a day in which we embark on a new chapter as the Washington Commanders.
Our new uniform.
All right.
Ta-da!
With the new name of Washington Commanders, the NFL franchise is using a naval term, making a connection to DC's military history. The team's Twitter account also showed its new name, logo, and uniform on Wednesday morning. Established in Boston in 1932, the team has changed its name several times. The decision to rebrand happened during the summer of 2020 after the death of George Floyd and the social unrest that followed. Mounting pressure from team sponsors helped force the decision. And that's all we have for you tonight on the Capitol Report. Thank you for tuning in. From Washington, D.C., I'm Steve Lance, and we'll see you again tomorrow.